All right, this is chapter 5. It was a very thing that God was always rescuing his people, because it seemed that no matter how many times God saved his people, the Israelites were never quite safe for themselves. See, after God delivered his people from Egypt, he gave them a lot of commandments. That wasn't to punish them, but to help and protect them. You can find those commandments. One of the places you can find them is in Exodus chapter 20. They were good commandments, and if they obeyed the commandments, God's people would be blessed. There would be food and children and long life and protection and a new home. It'd be just like they were in paradise again. That's where God wanted to lead them all along, back to the garden. But if they didn't obey, there would be curses, just like the ones that fell on Adam and Eve and the serpent. You can see the two pictures. One shows the beauty of blessing, and the other is the darkness and the brokenness of curses and disobeying God's word. As you might have guessed, the people didn't do so well obeying God's commands, and after Moses and his helper Joshua died, they disobeyed even more. They ignored the most important commands, and when they did work hard at some rules, like getting their sacrifices right, they didn't really obey those rules from the heart. They just checked them off their list and forgot about the more important commands. Not that God's people deserved it, but God finally gave them their promised land. God did the work to get them in, but God's people didn't do the work to drive everyone else. And this caused a lot of trouble for the Israelites. And that was the story that happened in the book of Joshua. Well, they constantly had enemies to fight, and worse, they constantly had to fight the temptation to be just like their enemies. Sometimes things would go well for Israel when they had a good leader and when they obeyed, but most often things went poorly. You can see the enemies, and then you can see that they made something to worship other than God. God gave the Israelites rules, but they didn't follow them. God made his dwelling among them, but they didn't act like they wanted him to stick around. God sent prophets, but Israel didn't listen. God provided priests, but the priests didn't know how to be holy. Later, God gave them kings, but the kings were a royal pain. Israel was a mess. Of course, God still had his promises to keep, but most days it was hard to imagine how anyone could save this stubborn people. It would have been even harder to imagine how the promised man could come from among his people. What do you think some of those pictures represent? What do you see? I know I see a crown. Do you think that's for the bad kings or the promised king to come? We'll see what else he says. Oh, chapter 6. We're done for now. So stay tuned. Let's see what happens as the snake crusher comes to bring us back to the garden.